Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Welcome to Popcorn Psychology. This is a very special episode here. We are doing the movie of the year thus far, The Batman. The plot of this film is one that I think I'm going to remind you all of because we want to recognize it as a 3-hour movie. So in this film, we see each of our characters deal with the theme presented to us in the trailer that something's in the way. And we see Batman, Alfred, Penguin, Falcone, Catwoman, and Jim Gordon all have to deal with this massive block in front of them from being the character we know and love them to be. And I think that the way that we see this done in this film is so excellent, but we have to see each of them work through as the plot goes on, that the Riddler here is manipulating Batman into following a trail of clues that leads him to discover the corruption that has taken hold of the entire city. It has corrupted the police department. It corrupted the DA's office. It corrupted the mayor's office. It corrupted his father. It corrupted everything. And we see Riddler having discovered this and then leading them all on a chase by starting to kill off these figures one by one and seeing if Batman can figure out the clues to understand how corrupt this whole city is and how everyone has been playing Falcone's game. And as we watch this movie develop, we see Batman and Catwoman get introduced. We see them form a partnership that feels kind of creepy and manipulative at first by Batman until it becomes more symbiotic and understanding and empathetic towards each other, realizing that we both are two sides of the same coin before they all realize that really they are three sides of the same coin, with three orphans dealing with their internal struggles differently in three different ways, with Riddler, Batman, and Catwoman, while working in the side stories of how Jim Gordon and Penguin also come to power in Gotham. And I am geeked about it because we have with us a very special guest. We have Dr. Travis Langley joining us. Travis, if you could introduce yourself so our listeners know who you are.
Hi, I'm Travis. I like Batman. It's been one day since my last viewing of anything with Batman.
Saying it is the first step.
Hi, I am Dr. Travis Langley, distinguished professor of psychology at Henderson State University, best known as the author of the book Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Knight, the best book on Batman ever written by me, editor and head nerd of the herd on a dozen other books, and other podcasts and panels, which these folks have been involved with in different ways along the way. I am happy to be here, and I'll tell you, I've been turning down interviews a lot lately, but I like these people.
Oh, well, thank you.
We are stoked to have you.
Yes, we are.
Let's talk something batty here, okay?
Let's get nuts. So
I love the callback to that line of all things in that Flash. Oh, yeah.
I should probably be breaking my lamp right about now, but as soon as you say that. But for a quick plot catch up on the Batman starts off with Cape Crusader in year 2 of his Batman career, which he lets us know right off the bat that he has been 2 years of nights, 2 years of darkness, 2 years of instituting fear throughout the city of Gotham to try to intimidate and deploy vengeance against the criminals and the underworld that has been wreaking havoc across the city. We open up right away with Riddler murdering the current mayor and then proceeding to lead Batman and the Gotham police along a chase as he provides them clues to the serial killer nature of his mischief, and he starts knocking off people who have been responsible for a massive corruption scandal throughout Gotham, pillaging the fund left behind by one Thomas Wayne, the renewal fund, in order to restore faith in Gotham. And we learn throughout the course of this film, as we watch this movie, we see the plot that the Riddler has unraveled and the corruption he's uncovered, all leading back to the corruption of the entire city government, looping in mob boss Carmine Falcone in order to take over this $1 billion fund and distribute it amongst themselves under the guise of a drug bust to take down the other famous mob boss of Gotham, Salvatore Maroni. And as we go through this movie, we see massive themes of betrayal of trust, a development of identity and purpose, and a loss of identity of your caregivers and the things that make you feel safe in the world.
Mm-hmm. I'm really impressed by that summary, Ben. Like, that's a lot of names in there. I think I identified about half.
You did a great job.
I left out Jim Gordon.
Oh, snap. Okay. So yeah, like distrust in systems and betrayal of trust, I feel like obviously is like the main thread in this movie that I noticed. Not just with, because obviously that's the bent of it, right? Like Batman thinks, or Bruce thinks that like he has to be the one that comes in and keeps the city running tight in terms of like corruption and safety because of his trauma, bingo word, of, his parents dying. It's the 20th anniversary, right? Of his parents' death?
It happened to be the 20th anniversary of his parents' death when the mayor gets killed.
Okay.
Yep.
Don't make those eyes at me, Ben. I wrote that down. And if I wrote it down, it happened in the movie.
They cover it. They cover it. Thomas Wayne died 20 years ago. Or Thomas Martha.
And this is true to many serial or mass murderers in real life. Some of them will choose anniversary dates.
Oh.
Because they strive to get relevance and to find something to start a pattern.
Which we have definitely talked about on the podcast in general in terms of having to find meaning or having to find a purpose.
What I really liked about this movie is that the Riddler and Batman have like these parallel stories in which the system, if you will, let both of them down in different ways as young children. And they kind of were, quote unquote, became orphans at like this around the same time, or were orphans at the same time. And we see in the story how that event for both of them shapes who they become, and really not just shapes who they become, but also legitimizes the paths that they take in life and the ways that they choose to manage their distrust in systems and the betrayal of trust. And I think what's really interesting is how that juxtaposes with them, of where the Riddler was, really liked his quote where he says, living in some tower over the park is not being an orphan. Bruce Wayne is an orphan the way that I was an orphan. And so I think I really like how this movie demonstrates that when systems let you down, like how like the privilege in that and the betrayal of trust, depending on who you are within a system, plays a big part in who you become and how much you rely on the system and still trust in like adults and the things around you to take care of you.
And watching that these characters erode or have their trust eroded by every ounce of protection that they expected to have, whether it's from their parents, from the city, from the police, from the orphanage that they live in, watching each one of them have to face that they've been failed by every most important caregiver in their life. Like we see Jim Gordon gets his idea of the police failed for him as his friend and boss. The police commissioner is the second murder of the movie, and he is revealed to be a rat and part of the massive conspiracy. And then we see Bruce has to reckon with the loss of faith in the system that the police and his wealth will protect him from evil, and that now he has to take that on himself. And that in doing so, the mask of Batman, which he puts on as his primary face, as Riddler so aptly calls him on, is also frightening people. And I love the way that they work that in, that he can't be this source of fear in order to be what he thinks he needs to be. And then we see Penguin is betrayed by Carmine, his mentor being a rat. And we see Catwoman betrayed by her father, Carmine.
In more than one way.
In more than multiple ways.
Because he also killed her mom.
And just a real creep to her.
story-wise, he had to kill mom. Otherwise, she's just this kid who wants to murder him because she feels slighted by him. That's not quite motive enough. It's like, okay, kill mom. Okay, now she's not just being this, I don't feel appreciated.
Yeah.
More than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, because I feel like, too, what I really liked about this movie is that the Bruce Wayne character and the Riddler character and Selena Kyle in ways feel really young in a way that I think is also authentic to not feeling like you can trust the system around you. I think also like adolescence is the age in which you really start questioning authority, questioning people around you if they can take care of you, like thinking you know more than the people in charge or the people around you. And I even wrote in my notes, like Batman or Bruce Wayne feels like such a teenager in this movie, and they all feel really young, even though like I'm assuming they're probably, honestly, the actors are older than like Christian Bale and stuff when he was Batman in like the Christopher Nolan movies, at least the first one. I think he was only like 30 or 32 and Robert Pattinson's like 35. And so even though he is older age-wise, they felt really young in this movie in a way that I think is age appropriate to this kind of development they're going through in terms of like, I can't trust the people around me to do it. So I'm going to take the reins. And I have the hubris to think that I'm the one to go out into the city and be vengeance and to kill people because I'm the one that's right and they're wrong. It's also like that rigid thinking that comes up when we are teenagers, but also comes up when we're traumatized, when we have high anxiety, high sadness, any sort of elevation in our thinking gets so rigid and it gets locked into that place of like some people are bad and some people are good. And I do recognize that movies like the Batman and superhero plots and things like that do make a meal of like that rigidity as well, of like these are the bad guys and these are the good guys. And I know modern superhero movies, as far as I can tell, are sort of flexing on that a bit and like good can be bad and bad can be good and blah, 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 blah. But I do think that was also coming up for me of like this of leaning into that rigidity that is also very common in that age of development and figuring out who you are and who you can trust.
They're all cases of arrested development.
Yes.
They have all missed out on important milestones that are more common in other people's lives. Bruce did not undergo normal milestones of growing up. I mean, we know he did not have a normal high school experience. He did not have anything resembling that kind of life. I mean, as Selena commented to him in one of the comics, it's like, you are still that 8-year-old kid. But I mean, he's grown and matured some, but this Bruce in particular did not bother to go through and develop the Bruce Wayne side of his life. And so even less than any other Bruce we've ever seen, he has not undergone those normal milestones. And likewise with Riddler and Selena, a Freudian would say they're fixated emotionally at these earlier ages. And but they're in certain ways, they're all immature.
Yes,
absolutely.
Very immature. I think that's really clear, is that they're all very fixated and stuck in a like childlike mindset and interpretation of what happened to them and what they have to do about it in order to rectify it.
And one of them at least realizes he needs to grow up.
Yeah. Even like the presentation of him, like I did a real hard laugh out loud, probably to people's chagrin when I saw this the first time, when he comes downstairs in that big t-shirt and like the sunglasses inside of his like Gothic mansion that he lives in. And he's just so teenagery in like his presentation, which I know was on purpose, and the hair and everything just so like emo. And it is true. Like this is a Bruce Wayne that doesn't seem interested in being like a full person or even having that persona, and seems really awkward with it too. Like all his interactions with Selena, he feels uncomfortable to me. Like when she's more provocative towards him and like flirting with him, it seems like he's like, I don't know how to play this part of my life. Like I've never been around a girl before. It's kind of his energy. And like,
certainly true.
Well, and certainly a girl that he might be interested in. He also has no awareness of his physical presence in terms of Like when he gets really close to her to make sure that you can't tell that she has the contact things in her eyes. I don't know what the fuck to call them.
Contact cameras?
I guess. Yeah. He gets really close, but has no awareness of like what it looks like he might be attempting to do. Like get close to her, or like try something. And you can tell that she's like waiting for it. And that's not what he's doing at all, because he has he just doesn't have any awareness of maybe that part of himself, which would make a lot of sense with someone who decided that their only identity is going to be one thing. And so they don't need to worry about all the other pieces because he's just going to be alone because he's a teenager and like he has to do it by himself. And all those things that I think teenagers experience always.
I think that's the central conflict of every character. And I'm even going to separate out in my head that Bruce and Batman have separate arcs in this movie, and they definitely encounter separate challenges. Like Bruce has to deal with that he can't be a teenager and he can't hold insolent anger and keep Alfred at arm's distance.
He has to meet with the accountants. He can't stop not meeting with the accountants.
Yeah.
You can't go to board meetings asleep, but you see him really have to reckon with the fact that Alfred is your dad, and that
I know.
The idea you have of your father, I really enjoyed that arc that they pulled. They pulled a couple things from the Long Halloween series, and that was the Carmine and Thomas Wayne thing is from that, and so is Selena and Carmine's story. But watching that, I thought was a really well done twist on the typical like Thomas Wayne, the doctor, the White Prince of Gotham, and to realize that, oh no, your dad was not perfect. And Bruce have to struggle with that and realize that Alfred has actually been dad, and Alfred has been the one who's been a pure presence in my life, except that Alfred also lied to me. And now I have to reckon with the fact that everybody that I've held to an irrational, unreasonable standard, kind of like teenagers do when they don't understand that life is complicated as a grown-up and that complicated decisions have to be made, that Bruce has to reckon with that. Well, Batman has to reckon with that. Batman can't be your teenage rampage because other people are going to be seeing you as a symbol of fear, not someone coming to rescue them, which I thought they did on the lovely downtown Chicago L platform beautifully with after he rescues the man on the train, that the man gets terrified of him too and runs away. And says, please don't hurt me. He doesn't say, thank you for rescuing me. Thank you for helping me. He acts afraid, and they make a big moment to show that turn when he's rescuing the people in the Gotham arena, where they go on the huge scene to see Batman take up the torch and carry that and become the light bringer rather than the darkness is the way I interpret that. And seeing that it has to be Bella Real that is the first one to reach out to him instead of cowering behind the pillars in the water as they're evaluating whether is this man in a mask more dangerous to me than a flood. And watching Batman have to earn that trust there and switch what he symbolizes from being this character of vengeance to becoming whatever he's going to grow into in the next film.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I really enjoyed the speech that Alfred gives him at the hospital of like, look, you were 8. I wasn't going to tell you the plot of what actually fucking happened. You're 8 years old. That's not something that any parent would do no matter what. And I think what's hard about that is that he's not 8 anymore. And continuing to not allow him to get that information is a part of keeping him in that arrested development, because you're not allowing him to experience the truth or to help him figure that out. Like, but he hasn't been 8 forever. Like he was 8 and then he, so I think it would make sense to feel unsure and to have that confusion of Alfred, Daddy Butler. Alfred is the one who's been taking care of me and the one who I clearly care for, but he also lied. So what does that mean about the world? And that in a different context, I think that would have some different outcomes. But I feel like he's already so set in being the Batman that I think that would have only been the outcome. Like, I don't know that he would have room to feel that way in that setting, in that moment.
He and Riddler both are incomplete people. Very much so. Riddler so much that if we knew more about him, we could judge whether he fits something like borderline personality disorder. But again, it's like we only see we only see pieces of their lives. But Riddler is even more narrow. What we see on him. With Batman, he has not seen the value of even a Bruce Wayne public persona, of the family business, even though it pays the bills for his toys. And also with Batman, he is, because with Keaton and especially Bale's version, you know, Bruce, when he starts off as Batman, he's got the Bruce Wayne public persona, although more so with Bale. Because Keaton's Bruce is still reclusive a lot of the time. But with Bale, he outright tells Alfred on the plane right before he becomes Batman, when they're talking about why bats, he wants to produce a symbol. You know, so he already knows he needs a symbol that would scare the wicked and inspire hope in the innocent. And this Batman has not yet figured out the full mission. So even though he's technically further along in the Batman career, he's not as far along in the development of the Batman identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which
yeah.
is
Go ahead, Ben.
I was just saying, it's done so well to watch them have to like mature throughout this film in order to reach their goals. Like all of the characters except Carmine become aware that they have only been playing with half a deck while everyone else is playing with a full deck.
I
I'm
mean,
not sure I see a lot of growth in Riddler either.
Or not.
He gets literally arrested.
That's another thing about, I got to be real careful when I talk about something like personality disorder. I'm going to say it's a sliver of people. It's like, yes, a disproportionate number of people, of stalkers among those who are not psychotic. A disproportionate, maybe 45% of those who are not psychotic have borderline personality disorder. I don't want anybody to hear it the other way around and think I'm saying this about most people with that condition. Like most of them are not stalkers. Most of them are not trying to live through somebody else, but that's definitely a manifestation for some. And Riddler's really fitting that so well. And then this bit when his heart is broken after he led Batman around. It's like Batman has not had a lot of actual successes along the way. And he better have, it's like in 7, he's leading them along. But unlike 7, Batman just crushes the villain emotionally by not playing into that part of the game, by not giving the stalker character the thing that played into that fantasy, that had been kind of a parasocial fantasy with the Batman. He's the only character who really calls him the Batman, and that breaks that, and it breaks part of Riddler there, which could be necessary for him to find some growth. But what if somebody else happens to be the person that will then, we'll play with this broken guy and take him somewhere else. But that's for a joke for another time.
I think you're bringing up an interesting point, which I didn't really think about too much before we jumped on here. And this is kind of more, if we want to jump to like the development of identity and purpose, is that both Bruce and the Riddler are rooted in trauma, right? They're rooted in like, I lost my caregivers at an early age, and now I'm trying to figure out what to do with that and how that impacted the potential of my life. Because I think they're also both kind of stuck in this idea of like, what could have my life had been if XYZ had happened. With the Riddler, it's like, if this renewal fund had actually been used, if people like Bruce Wayne actually gave a shit about me. And so I think what's interesting is when we lose that sense of security, especially when we're young, we're looking towards it either within or without. And like you're saying, like the Riddler really aligns with Batman and thinking that they're on the same team. And we also see him do that with his sense of community, like where he finds like his online community of like, when they said 500 followers, I laughed out loud. That's not that many followers. I was like, what old man wrote this movie? Anyway.
Well, also you see, even if it's 500 there on the internet, what's the number that actually shows up? It's not 2 dozen.
No,
it's not 2 dozen. I think it's about 12 and a half.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to tell in the chaos.
For sure.
Yeah, 500 did not show up.
He's got 500 followers. And I think, and I'm thinking about that and kind of the trajectory of how Riddler finds community and wants to be attached to like the others, like Batman. And then Batman's very like, I'm doing this by myself. It's kind of the way they were raised as well. Like the Riddler was raised in an orphanage. Like he was raised amongst other peers and learned a lot of like, it sounds like the way he talks about like taking care of babies because they're crying at night and like someone dies every winter. And like, he seems really attached to community or like feeling like I'm in it with others, even though I'm against the big, big out group. Whereas Bruce is very like, no. And so I think that is an interesting way of seeing how they developed and how they decide to become these personas of themselves in a way that's going to help them gain back control over a system and over an environment that has felt uncontrollable since they were little. Because really, what are the Batman and the Riddler trying to do but can gain control over an uncontrollable system, or over a system that does not deserve their trust and therefore needs to be managed? Which is like, I see that with clients, and well, not in superhero ways, but in smaller ways.
That conflicted relationship with community is also in his, well, the way he is about anybody, the Batman, that he wants to connect with. And there's a book on borderline personality disorder that was titled "I Hate You, Don't Leave Me," reflecting that mixture of, idealizing and demonizing the same person. And the Riddler, he both demonizes community and wants it. And he wants connection to Batman and is upset by it too. And so what is interesting is this and Batman Forever have, of all things, some of those things in common. And it's like the Riddler is usually written as one of the most narcissistic characters out of all of Batman's rogues gallery.
Right.
But in Batman Forever and this one, he is, idealizing, although in Batman Forever, it's Bruce Wayne he's focused on, but he's idealizing Batman and attacking him. He's doing these mix, and he is so upset with Batman Forever. It's when he pitches his grand invention and pushes for an answer, and Val Kilmer's Batman is like, it raises too many questions, and Carrie's face just drops. The Riddler is heartbroken. It's got some echoes in that scene with Paul Dano being heartbroken by the Batman not playing into this fantasy that he'd had in his head.
No, that's a great point. I didn't even think about, you're right. Like, Batman Forever is my favorite, 90s Batman movie, mostly because I thought Val Kilmer was the cutest when I was like 12 when that came out. And he was my Batman. And
you probably haven't seen Mask of the Phantasm.
I don't even know what that is, and I don't think I want to know.
It's an animated theatrical film that was based on Batman the Animated Series.
Oh, okay.
And it's honestly, a lot of people still call it one of, if not the best Batman movie ever made.
Okay. But yeah, you're right in that even in that portrayal of the Riddler, he's very like, I'm doing my inventions in my little apartment on my own, but I'm also doing a team up with girlfriends. But I'm also like seeking community with this other villain and our two girlfriends, or his two girlfriends. That one of them, I don't know. But and so that is an interesting juxtaposition of like, we're going to be deeply almost in love with each other and or sibling attachment, or like, I need to destroy you, which is kind of, I think, a lot of the things that I was reading when this came out, and even what occurred to me too, and what I'm connecting with this is how people were thinking about like the quote unquote incel community and how that connects with like the Riddler and then his little gaggle of guys, and how that's a similar energy there, which is that I feel like all my problems are because I've been rejected by society, or I'm not getting my emotional, sexual needs met. And yet the way that I'm dealing with that is by actively attacking either like on the internet or in real life, the exact people that I'm wanting so much affection and support from, and then being mad that they are interpreting my energy towards them as bad. It's like caught in this loop that actually confirms the bias that you hold as well, which people love to confirm bias, even if that bias is miserable. Like, our brains love to sameness. And so it reiterates this idea of everyone's rejecting me, so fuck them. And then they reject me because I'm telling them to fuck themselves. And then I'm like, what's everybody else's problem? But yeah, so I think, it definitely is that love-hate, like I hate you, don't leave me kind of energy that you're talking about. It's all kind of connecting in one plane in my brain.
Yeah, I think that a really well stated, I think you just nailed it, Brittany.
Well, and also this idea that we're all, what do they say, heroes in our own story. And I think what I really liked about this movie too, in terms of identity, and I think what's a real turn for Batman, is when he unmasks that dude, one of the incel Riddler people, and he says, I am vengeance. And I was like, oh shit, because that kind of illustrates that fact that everyone thinks that they are doing everyone knows the reasons why they're doing something, but that doesn't mean that every other people understand why they're doing that. And I think what you were saying, Ben, I think that was an enlightening moment for him, that I need to be making conscious choices of how I'm demonstrating myself to the community and like teaming up with the system I don't trust, like with Bella Real, because there has to be some sort of community trust there, or I'm just another bad guy.
Correct. And that I think that I am vengeance statement was so much more powerful because that was a character that both Bruce and Batman encounter. That was the guy from the funeral.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
The guy that was talking shit about Bruce Wayne?
Mm-hmm. The guy that was standing, the guy that looked very much like Joe Chill to me.
Yes, that's the one. So many fans seeing that thought that looks like a Joe Chill type character.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
The Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, when he has the, I'm not the bad guy, I can't be the bad guy realization. There are these things that some of these heroes, which we get on the big screen in a way that they can't do quite the same way in the comics because they start off as better people, but they can. But the big screen, with repeatedly giving us different versions, they can play with different aspects of these.
Yeah.
A lot of fans did not care for Daredevil killing some bad guys before he decided, I shouldn't do that.
Oh, interesting.
Affleck just plays superheroes who, they kill until they don't.
That seems true.
Listen, he's a tough guy. He's got to let you know he's a tough guy first.
I mean, he was definitely the most physically imposing Batman by far.
Mm-hmm.
At 6'4", he's a big dude.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think
Chris Pattinson's taller than a lot of people thought he was.
Robert Pattinson?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I think he's 6'1" or 2".
Yeah, he's like 6'1" or 2". He's
right.
It's just he has a different shape to him. He has the it's more like 70s Batman and the type of athletic body that he has.
It's because that hair it knocks like 6 inches off his height.
Yeah, I noticed that too, that they were playing up to that, like how much taller he was than other people. They really did make a effort to show Batman towering over people, which they really couldn't do with Keaton at 5'8".
No.
I will say what I did like about this movie, though, we've kind of touched upon, is in terms of the identity and the development of like seeing a Batman so early in his development of being like the Batman, and how I liked hearing his sort of inner monologue of how he's not sure if he's making a difference, and like kind of like the scrappy energy of that. And like that he is going home and he's like, doesn't look great. And he's like rewatching the cameras because he's like, I have to, what does he say? I have to force myself to remember everything that happened. Like feeling like watching a teenager really trying to figure out, being really determined about what he thinks is the right course, but also feeling really unsure of himself. I would say the Riddler comes off much more determined about what he's doing, but that also might be because he's a community backing him up and encouraging him, and that I think can create more sense of like, I'm doing the right thing. Whereas Bruce Wayne is doing it all by himself and having to continually affirm to himself, I'm doing the right thing. Because I could also see Alfred, because he loves him so much, like probably discouraging him from doing this because he doesn't want his baby boy be in danger like he is, And so it was interesting to watch him doubt himself like that. And I think like this is more final thoughts, but I think that's what always made me kind of like
bingo card
put off by Bale's portrayal of Bruce Wayne, is that he's so arrogant and like sure of himself and like, I'm doing the right thing. And like, even though Batman Begins is his origin too, he's very like kind of blinders on that I'm doing the right thing. And I don't really care how it comes off and what I'm doing and my weird privilege that I'm throwing around by getting myself thrown in jail and then removing myself on my private jet when I'm done with that lesson. And so I do like watching this Batman who is scrappier, who's trying to figure it out and is open to the idea that he might not be doing the right thing and learning from that.
I don't know if he's open to the idea as much as he is aware that it's not working in the way that he thought it was. I don't know that he I think he gets to that point by the end of the film where he feels like, oh, maybe there are some things I could be doing differently in this way. But I feel like it's a really hard in the face lesson that he has to learn, that I think a part of that happens when the people who are working for the Riddler, however we want to, the incels,
the gang,
the gang that are working with him, when that person does say, I am vengeance, and it's like, and you could just see the look on his face is like, oh, fuck. Is that what I sound like when I say that? It's like, yeah, that's what you sound like when you say that.
Am I the dick in this situation?
Yeah.
Which you see like Selena's balance there to kind of show that, where she's kind of like, yeah, you do. And I think looking at this movie, like seeing these people's identities start to form and change and separate out from what they thought they had to be, that very immature, underdeveloped, locked in singular focus. We see each of them struggle with that. And we haven't talked about Selena's struggle and identity as much, or the fact that there's really 3 orphans in the story, not 2.
Yeah. I mean, I think she's got the sort of Arrested Development mentality of closure, which we've ragged on in other episodes of this podcast, of this idea that if I can just do this one thing, then I don't know, I can move on with my life and I can be like a whole person, or whatever fantasies on the other side of killing Carmine Falcone. She
is locked into that. She is very locked into like getting what she is owed. It's not necessarily about killing him, and she doesn't want to kill him until he kills Annika.
True.
I don't think she gets that vengeful, but I think she wants to take the thing that he cares about most, which is money. She seems focused on stealing his money, working her way into his system so that she can learn about the patterns that he uses to make money, where he puts it, where he keeps it, and how to steal it. I think that's the way she's striking him, until he takes Annika from her in the same way she lost her mother. She doesn't snap until she hears that recording and then realizes that that's the same way her mother died.
Yeah. But also sees finds her friend's dead body in that trunk too. Doesn't help.
No, that doesn't help either.
But yeah, it's still this idea that like her whole identity when we meet her in the movie is so wrapped up in Carmine. Like, I'm going to work in his place and I'm going to ingratiate myself in his life. And it's just that narrow-mindedness. I mean, she does develop friendships, that might have just been like incidental, like meeting girls at the club that she formed relationships with, and like being friends with Annika or more. I don't know. She calls her baby a lot. So I was trying to figure out if they were in a relationship or were just friends. I think it's left a little gray, but maybe not. But
I didn't feel it was gray.
Yeah.
I thought they were in a relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
I pretty much kind of figured it was just, I don't know. But yeah, like that kind of locked in where her identity isn't really fully formed yet. And I don't know if she could be even like open herself up to the idea of developing herself more, like seeing herself beyond her father.
I feel like I don't disagree that clearly there's 3 people who are trying to figure out who they are. I think that what I experienced differently in Selena versus the other 2 is that what I feel like is different is that she is somebody who is surviving and working really hard to survive in a way that I don't think fucking Rich Boy is. And that I don't think that the Riddler has clearly gotten enough. He has access to the things that he needs to complete what he's doing. So clearly he has some way of living. I feel like her position is a little bit different than that, and that it's more out of somebody who is in survival mode. So it's just like the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until you, and then eventually getting to a point where the only way that things feel like they're going to be fixed is if I take this drastic step that I have to take in order to kind of mitigate everything else, because it really starts to point, all the arrows point to this one person. And if I just get rid of this one person, which is a part of magical thinking in general that people do when we think about people who have people who struggle with depression or people who struggle with rigid thoughts or whatever, this idea of magical thinking that like, if I move from where I live, then I'm not going to feel sad anymore.
Yeah.
Similar to if I kill this person who is the person who's traumatized or killed killed all the people in my life, that then I'll feel better, or I'll feel like I've completed something and now I can do something else. But I don't even know that she is thinking about that necessarily. It really seems like more being in the moment and having to deal with that. And I feel like Bruce and the Riddler even both have a little bit more time to consider that than she does. Does that make sense?
Because she's like just out in the world trying to like
survive.
Make it.
Yeah, trying to survive. And I think clearly she's trying to figure out all the stuff that you guys said about her biological father. But I feel like, I don't know, she felt different to me than that.
Well, she's also like socially developed in a way that the two boys aren't, if I'm going to call them that, which I think is, I mean, to get into like cisgen, like heteronormative stuff, like I would imagine as a female presenting person, a woman, like there's a bit more savviness that she needed to have to protect herself of like moving through the world, especially as a like beauty standard wise, like traditionally attractive person, of having to like feign off advances and, you know, using that to her advantage to get into the club. And you can see the difference within that social norms too, because when she wears those contact camera things and then she's moving through the club and Bruce is like, keep staring at that guy. And she's like, you don't get it, dude. If I stare at a guy, like that's going to cause a problem, because if you, as a woman, if you make too much eye contact with a man, like they will make a thing about that. And so in that moment,
they think that gives them permission to talk to you and pretty much treat you however they want to.
Yeah. And so I think that was a good moment of like where he is just so determined on like the mission, and she's more aware of like the world pretty much, and like moving through the world and the consequences of that.
Absolutely. And Catwoman throughout her history has been a blend of using finesse, fighting style, but also using her sexuality as a weapon and using it to get into situations that other people can't get into. She's incredibly physically capable, but also mentally capable of using other people's desire for her as a means to exact her missions, independent of what other people want. And Catwoman is also always on her team first, period.
Well, Selina's greater goals are about control over herself, control over her own life. Those two guys, both of them, they have goals that involve control over other people, whether it's manipulating people through his crimes or controlling people by beating them into, not committing crimes. And even the scene in there where you're referring to with the bit over, oh, look at him. No, I'm not going to look at him. She's trying to assert her control over herself in that situation where she's already following what he's directing her to do, and he's trying to exert control over her.
That's a good point.
Very, very Batman.
Yeah, and her trying to make that point too of like, you don't know. That's a great point of just, he's really pushing her boundaries in that scene. And like, as a woman, I was like, oh, like I felt nervous for her. And I felt annoyed with him that he was not thinking about the position he was putting her in, because it either wouldn't occur to him or that's not his, like you were saying, that's not his parameters that he's thinking through.
Well, as Batman's usually written, part of his arrogance is that he is right more often than everybody else. And he gets in the habit of being right more often than anybody else, which can lead to some big errors when he is wrong and isn't quite as ready to see it. Here, though, we have, like you were mentioning earlier, where he's not as arrogant as the Christian Bale one, but he doesn't know as much about other people. He hasn't bothered to learn as much about other people. And at this point in his life, he will never develop as good an intuitive sense of people, even though he still has plenty of room to grow and has learned he needs to.
Yeah, which is a big part of like the Bruce Wayne persona, is being able to read people and like play people off each other, at least be able to intuit how people, like the Christian Bale version of like, I have intuition about how other people perceive Bruce Wayne. And I use that sort of like social awareness to manipulate their view of me so that I can kind of do whatever I want in the dark of night. And even in the scene, the funeral, where he has to like put on his little Bruce Wayne outfit and go, like, he's still being so like emo and awkward and like gothic and like all this like stuff. Like he doesn't know how to switch on. And I would be interested if, I'm assuming they're going to make another one of these movies because of the Joker.
Yeah, they've announced
ending.
that they're making it.
I'm interested to see how that develops. Like if he ever develops more of the Bruce Wayne persona, or if he kind of continues on this route of head down rich guy who just kind of like weird hermit energy who comes out every once in a while for like state events.
Yeah, there he at the funeral he's alone in the crowd. Or at least that's how he thinks of himself, but he's who he is, so it still draws plenty of attention that he doesn't know how to deal with.
Yeah. Which is
they made that really clear. And jinx Hannah, I guess.
And at this point in his life, somebody doesn't a great extreme introvert does not at age 30 decide I'm going to become an extrovert and just naturally do that. Even if they get good at it, it'll always feel like completely like acting.
Yeah.
And he'll be drained from it emotionally, and that'll take up focus.
Yeah, that goes back to the original Jungian meaning of introvert and extrovert. Because, in the Jungian meaning, because he's the one who came up with the term, that introvert is drained by people. And here's a Bruce Wayne who is drained by people.
Very much drained by people. And you see that like when Bella is trying to get his attention, and he just shrinks back and goes like, oh, man. Like she's going to
be noticed.
Right. And, she's so confident and like direct and assertive. Like she is like, I am going to get my point across right now. Right.
Yeah, he's wishing he could have worn his motorcycle helmet at the funeral, because that's about the only time nobody notices, Bruce Wayne or guy in a bat costume.
I mean, that's also a good point. Like in the scenes where we see him more like in civilian clothing, he still has like a mask on. Like he's still wearing his little motorcycle helmet and jetting around the city like that. And not even trying to like have like a driver who drives in places, like still kind of trying to be like under the radar in all ways.
He's independent and he's trying to be in stealth mode.
Which, driving his very early Corvette into the sea of rich people cars and the red carpet of a funeral is not the best strategy, perhaps.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. What an interesting choice of vehicle to go to something like this when it's seemingly that he doesn't want to be noticed at all.
So how is that car? You referred to the very early model. How it's like, have all those cars just been things that were left over from his parents all those years ago?
Yeah, my assumption is probably just walked down to the garage and he was like, well, they're probably all really nice old classic cars. And he was like, this one seems the least ostentatious. Yeah. I'll take this one.
Maybe.
And he probably doesn't even have.
What does he know?
Yeah. I mean, he does seem like.
He did come up with the scariest Batmobile ever. When we first saw the pictures of Batmobile as a muscle car, damn right, Batmobile is a muscle car. That thing was scary.
Yeah. I loved that thing. I loved that. That whole scene was awesome. I really enjoyed.
At points, it's the most cartoonish scene in the entire movie.
Oh,
when the
ridiculous.
Penguin is like
the penguin in the car and the street, and things are crashing, and somehow he's not killing anybody. It's like that whole thing burned up. It's like we did cartoon violence for a little bit there. We just are.
Yeah, and of course the ramp on the truck carrier folding down at exactly the second he hits his boosters.
That's Smokey and the Bandits,
Yeah, and I think kind of bridging off of that is the point, like part of this identity, and also what we've kind of talked about makes him different from the Riddler is that he has an abundance of resources. And so I think too, he's able to be like introverted and distant and standoffish and not really integrate into the world because he has like all these resources to fall back on at all times. Like he doesn't have to figure out how to get a car. There's a bunch of like classic cars probably in the garage. He doesn't have to be presentable. He doesn't have to learn how to be likable and sociable and all these other things because he has a lot of money. And, and that's pointed out in this movie of Bruce Wayne's not an orphan the way I was an orphan. And I think he doesn't really, which makes sense, affluenza. He doesn't seem to have a sense until like the Riddler says that I might have advantages that I wasn't aware of because I was so locked into the one thing I didn't have, which was my parents.
Yeah, I think Riddler has retreated, as he usually does, into his superior intelligence. I think Travis, your point about him being represented as so much less narcissistic, as maybe more showing borderline traits of being.
Well, he still definitely has some aspects of narcissistic ego, but not that level of security we tend to see with the Riddler.
Well, even just the way he cries, his like crying scene at the end, he's so upset. He's so distraught in a way that I guess you can see like more in like narcissistic tendencies when they're not getting their way, but he's doing that in a way that's very isolated. He's not doing that because someone's watching him cry. Like he's genuinely just upset and crying. Yeah, very childlike.
It's dysregulated.
Until he weaponizes his intelligence after that. I think that is when he chooses to weaponize and becomes narcissistic, because once he realized that Batman has rejected him, which, man, they let you sit in that like, ooh, does he actually know? For a long time.
Ave Maria.
They messed with us very well in that scene.
Yeah, it was a good twist. That whole where he didn't know that Bruce was Batman. That was really good.
Is this the first Batman movie since '66 in which nobody finds out his identity?
Oh.
I think every movie, somebody finds out his identity.
I think I think that is correct.
I think in a different Batman movie, Selina would have found out his identity. She would have slipped that cowl off before they kissed mouths.
No, she did not. No, she didn't. That's an interesting point. This is the first one. Normally, he has to tell somebody. There's somebody that has to know.
Somebody finds out. Somebody figures it out. Although the '89 movie, it's not quite clear why Alfred brought her down into the Batcave. When I saw it, I thought she had figured it out. It's like she's there, she's talking to Knox. He's like, what does that do to a kid? And she has this look and leaves. And then people are talking about, why did he bring her into the Batcave? But then I eventually found the script. Yes, it says in the script clearly that Vicky Vale figured it out. Selina and Bruce figure it out dancing under the mistletoe. In Batman Returns, when they're dressed in an evening gown and tux, when everybody else is wearing masks, because evening gown and tux, those are their disguises. And of course, Max Schreck finds out. As I get going through the movies, every movie somebody finds out.
That's true. I don't know if it's because and you guys can correct me because you know Batman way better than I do, but in this Batman, he just seems so disinterested in people knowing that side of him. And he doesn't really, people have said this before, like there's not really a Bruce Wayne in this movie. This movie is almost like all the Batman. And so I could see why he wouldn't feel that desire, because he's not interested. He doesn't need that at this point in his story. And even in the one relationship he has, which I know we'll talk about next with Alfred, he is even like holding him at arm's length in a way that I haven't really seen him do in the other movies. In the other movies, there's still like a back and forth but there's a much more, he's so mean. That's what I wrote in my notes. He's so mean to Alfred in a way that I don't really see him be this mean.
He genuinely does not realize Alfred's importance to him. A lot of kids don't genuinely realize their parents' important to them until maybe they grow old enough, or there's some particular moment that gives them that epiphany, and that happens in this one. It's like he genuinely has not realized how important Alfred is until the first time he feels that fear since childhood. This fear that he's lost Alfred. He didn't know. It was like, oh, I love him like a dad. I didn't know.
Which was that was a weird twist on it to see him, because normally they're so symbiotic, where even though Alfred's got the wisdom aspect and kind of gives Bruce room to be Master Wayne and not my son, there's still always a reverence for Alfred that this Bruce does not have.
It seems like
he realizes it.
It seems like in the other films, it's understood that they care about each other, and that it's mutual in whatever way that is. That it's mutual in some way, but that it's understood. And in this version, that is very clear that is not understood.
Well, the other films, Bruce Wayne / Batman is a whole person.
Yeah, exactly.
Also true. And I think another interesting depiction of these in the last two Batman iterations that have been live filmed, that Alfred and Bruce Wayne have been much closer in age than Michael Gough was from.
Michael Gough was he was old.
Right, and Michael Caine was too. But seeing the age of,
you're talking about this Alfred?
Jeremy Irons.
Yeah, Jeremy Irons. That's his name left my head.
Oh, okay.
Jeremy Irons and Ben Affleck are much closer in age than, they're maybe 15, 20 years apart, if I had to guess.
Well, it's like pretending Sean Connery can be Harrison Ford's dad in an Indiana Jones movie.
Mhm.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, before we jump into the relationship with Alfred, we'll take a break. So I think in terms of Alfred and him in this movie, like we were saying, they have such a different relationship, much more like you were saying, like teenager and parent. He literally says to Alfred the classic line, "You're not my father." Like very classic teenage line that, you hear in a lot of movies where a kid's being raised by not a biological parent and they throw that in their face at some point. And he even has a really hard time, in that scene when he's going to the funeral, he doesn't have cufflink. Even the affectionate act of Alfred taking his cufflinks off and putting them on Bruce. Even then he's like, "Stop doing this. Stop being a father to me. I hate it." He can't even accept.
When are you a
moments.
Wayne thing over those cufflinks?
Mean. That was so mean.
Alfred
I was like,
fatherly toward him, but he's still dismissing it.
So mean
for the dad figure,
right? And shaming Alfred and reminding him that you're my employee. Since when are you a Wayne? That cut me. I was watching that oh man, that's brutal. Alfred wore those as a honored gift and welcoming into the Wayne family from Thomas, and to have Bruce just cut him like that with it is brutal.
Well, that's also something that's been kind of missing from the movies along the way, is how much of a jerk Bruce can be. The comics, he can definitely be a jerk.
And Conroy's Batman is a jerk a lot, particularly once you get into the Arkham series, you really see a more mature elder Batman being pretty dismissive of everyone in his Bat family. I will do this alone. You got Robin and Nightwing and Catwoman, all of them push away.
Yeah, it was startling, how mean. And it is, and I think it's interesting watching the development of Alfred, which felt very different to me than the other Batmans, where Alfred also seems to put up with Bruce because he feels guilt. He says, you needed a father and all you had was me. And so he also seems to have his own complex about I have to stick around, take care of this boy no matter what. Almost like that is his purpose of doing his best to take care of this poor kid and run. I mean, he's running the business. Alfred is Mr. Wayne right now. He's meeting with the accountants. He's doing the books. He's keeping the business afloat. He is his dad. And in a way that I think is even more noticeable than the other movies. And how much he steps in on Bruce's behalf about everything and really takes up for Bruce and protects Bruce and really, which is, sometimes what parents have to do when kids are teenagers, of just not pick fights when your kid is just being an ass and pushing you away and kind of understanding what's going on at that stage of their development.
And also what I like about watching it is the fatherly restraint. We see Andy Serkis's version of Alfred have to hold. And depending on who's telling Alfred's story, Alfred is in many cases he's more of a bodyguard than he's a butler, at least when he's initially brought into the family. And he has a military history of being special forces. And you see this Andy Serkis, Alfred has some scars on his face. This is not the Michael Gough. This is not the Michael Caine who came over as the English butler, although Michael Caine reveals that he, also had some history doing some stuff.
Now, this is a little more of the Sean Pertwee from Gotham,
who I loved.
Well, and also even casting Andy Serkis, who has a more rough and tumble energy about him than sort of more of these posh actors like Jeremy Irons, even, who have been cast as Alfred in the past and have that poshness to them. He has more of that edginess. And you're right, he still does set boundaries with Bruce. Bruce is a teenager. He's you have to show up to this meeting. So get your shit together. And even though Bruce is shut up, he's still shows up for the meeting with the account. They do have that relationship that's very similar to a single dad and his kid with a real chip on his shoulder, really kind of making it work as best as they can, given Bruce's continued distance between them. And you're right, they're to me, the most pivotal emotional scene in the movie is when he thinks that Alfred's gonna die and he's calling the house and he's so panicked. And then when he gets there in the hospital and he's so upset, I really liked that's the biggest, in my opinion, emotional development in the movie, is realizing I have been operating from fear when really I do love you and I'm gonna hold your hand. in the hospital, Dad, because you're my dad.
All right. So we've about hit Travis's time limit here, and are thankful for your time. Travis, tell us, what's your final thought on the Batman? How'd you like this one compared to all of the immense amounts of Batman literature and film and cartoons that you have consumed over your illustrious career following this man in a bat suit?
I love almost all of them. There's one with an ampersand in the title, but also known as the Abomination. But
we do not talk about that.
This movie. For so many of the reasons that we've been talking about this whole hour, it does something different while bringing in all these different characters. It's telling a different story, telling one we haven't seen, showing us aspects of him becoming the hero that have not been told in the stories on screen before, and not explored as well in the comics either. Like, when does he decide, I'm going to develop this dual identity? We don't really get much of that decision. It's like, when does he decide I'm going to wear a mask? Okay, we don't get into that here, but the bit about fleshing out that dual identity and him growing. In what Batman movie has Batman really had that kind of growth arc before? And we can show us, like, yes, there are lessons that he learns in each of the Nolan movies and so forth, but not like this kind of heroic arc. We've never seen that before, and I just love it so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love this one too. Well, Travis, thank you so much for being so generous, lending us your time. We loved having you.
And everyone pick up Batman and Psychology, Volume 1 and 2, right? There's 2 now? Yes.
Second edition.
Yes, second edition.
Yes, I had 10 years of other stuff to think about and say.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Do we want to keep talking about Alfred Daddy, or do we want to move on to treatment? Do you have any other thoughts, Benjamin, that you would like to interject into this?
Unless we want to talk about the loss of Daddy that happened to Penguin and Jim.
I don't think I know what you mean.
The commissioner was Jim Gordon's mentor. And watching him turn to be part of this massive drug ring and corruption was devastating to him. And also watching Penguin go through the same thing of realizing his daddy was...
Can we call this episode Even Batman Has Daddy Issues, or Everybody in Gotham Has Daddy Issues?
Yeah, no doubt.
I think the title of it, Something in the Way, everyone has daddy issues in Gotham.
Yeah. What's in the way is their daddy issues.
There you go. And I will absolutely not sing Something in the Way.
All right.
So I love that CD. Love that album.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So cut for a break here.
Yep.
And we're back. So treatment. I can go first because for once in my life on this show, I have an idea that I just thought of 30 seconds ago. So you're welcome, audience. So I would say, because I take a family therapy, Hannah's a marriage and family therapist, but I've also, as a child therapist, done a good amount of family therapy with parents.
Because so child therapy is also
family therapy.
Well, everything. Everybody's a child on the inside is what I tell people. And as we've said time and time again in this movie, all the adults in this movie are goddamn teenagers. Well, Batman at least is. And so I think it would be interesting to do family therapy work with Alfred and Batman as if they are father, son, and teenager parent. Do I think either of them would go to therapy? Fuck no. Like, absolutely, positively not. They don't have any, their privilege allows them to evade all of the forced reasons why someone would have to go to therapy. So let's say on a lark, Alfred is like, I'm going to freeze your allowance. I'm going to freeze all the accounts until you go to therapy with me. Let's say I'm setting the scene of this drama. And then they got to therapy together. I think that it would have to be what family therapy can be good for in this kind of setting is reestablishing what the relationship is to each other after having this traumatic event happen where Bruce almost loses him and they kind of start to be more vulnerable with each other. But then where do we go from here? And so what family therapy can do is just kind of create like a safer setting in which to be more vulnerable. And then you have a person like me, a therapist, who can kind of also create those boundaries of how do we talk about stuff that we've maybe never talked about before, or how do we get more comfortable being vulnerable. I don't think they would have problems with this, but they might be a relationship where I have to tell them to try to like whatever happens in family therapy stays in family therapy. Like, I don't necessarily think they would take it out of it, but sometimes if you're working with people who are specifically more guarded, you sometimes have to create that parameter of you can say whatever you want to say in this space and try your best not to weaponize that outside of therapy. But I think with them, I would want to do sort of developing, I think their communication is absolute poop. And then also like, who do they want to be to each other? And what do they need from each other? Because I think that's what's really missing from their dynamic as well. They both have a lot of insecurity about who they are to each other. And I think that would have to happen first. Because Alfred saying like, you needed a father and all you had was me. So he clearly has his own stuff about my role within Bruce's life. So I think I would just love to do family therapy with the both of them and really break them down to the studs as vulnerable men and really have them practice. I think it would take a long time. I think they would have to see me in therapy for a while. And I think I'd probably have to sometimes we have to do games in therapy and family therapy to sort of like break the ice and loosen things up. I think they would struggle to just jump right into, let's talk about what's going on and let's talk about emotion. So I think they would be one where we might have to do some like collaborative games together in therapy or some exercises. They need maybe more structure to get to a place where then they can practice more vulnerability. So they might be a family therapy where I would get more into like, let's try this communication technique and let's practice it together. And is there a real life example we can use to practice this to kind of slowly get them warmed up to what therapy can feel like? Because they would be two that I would have to spend a long time earning their trust. So yeah. But like I said, I can't imagine them. Can you imagine them being in therapy and family therapy together and talking about their feelings?
But the one...
This version, maybe.
We'd get there. I think we could get there, but I think it would take a long time.
I think this is the only version where you would even ever have a chance.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Of Batman in general, or of Bruce Wayne, or whoever the fuck we want to call him. The thing that I think... Well, are you done, Brittany?
You can add to it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because I don't think that I'm going to do a whole spiel in general, but I think what I would want to do with them in that setting, like all the stuff that you said is true and would make sense and would be the best therapeutic relationship that you could have with them. And I think what I would do is ask them to role play each other.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Oh, psychodrama. Yay!
Psychodrama. That's it.
I love psychodrama.
They would be and that also would loosen them up possibly a little bit.
Absolutely. And it sometimes can be helpful to kind of let people show each other what they think of the other person in terms of their mannerisms, in terms of the way that they speak to each other, in terms of, there's just so many different pieces, but also really telling them like, okay, but you have to embody what you think it's like for them. This isn't just about the words that you're saying and the way that you're standing. This is about really think about, what do you know about Alfred? What do you know about, like, what does he even know about Alfred?
He's just some guy that's always been there. It's probably
that's what I mean. So like, what does he know about him? Does he know, did he have brothers? Does he know, kind of that idea of playing that to each other and having to really consider what it would be like getting that information in that way from this person that, I mean, I could see Bruce being like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. What do you want me to do? And I'm like, I want you to tell yourself that you need to do something. Mm-hmm. And I want to watch you do it. And I want to watch what you think it would be like if you were Alfred and you were the one who was asking yourself that question. Mm-hmm. And let's just pretend like there's no hard and fast rules about this. Like this is just pretending and let's see. And then kind of what you do is after you do this and hopefully there's some realizations. Sometimes there aren't any. And then so it's a lot on the therapist to kind of be like, hey, look, let's kind of process this. Like, what was it like to watch them be you? What was it like to receive information about them? What did you feel like felt accurate? What felt not accurate? And not like the in and outs of like an argument of like, well, I didn't say it like that. It's like, that's
because the point isn't to like,
the point isn't
get one over on each other.
Exactly. The point is to have a better understanding of what it's like standing in each other's shoes, having a conversation about something that you normally have that has this conflict that happens in the center because one or both of you are trying to have control of the situation. It's about power and control, which we see a lot with teenagers and with their parents, because it's a natural part of development. It's a natural part of becoming that age of trying to assert yourself. in a different way. And so I feel like that would be the thing that I would want to do. And that I would maybe suggest after a couple of sessions, probably. I don't know that I would do it as the first thing, because I think it might be could be a little off-putting to them as well. And be like, oh, therapy is just like a fucking joke or whatever. So I do feel like you would have to do all the things that Brittany, that you've already described, of building rapport, helping them trust you. But that, yeah, it would be a lot of like, one of the other things that I do sometimes with couples is, so I give them a picture and one person has to explain what the picture looks like and the other person draws it. This is a way to help them understand how communication works and what the difference is when we communicate different with each other. And so a part of it really ends up being them both understanding, because like usually what ends up happening is one person is very specific. One person is and another person is like, well, so it's kind of like in the middle and it's sort of like a circle, but not really. And you get that and it's very clear. And you also remove the piece that's a conversation that they've had together already. You remove the piece of this is something personal. This is something where I'm just giving you a picture and you're trying to help the person that you're in a familiar relationship with understand it. And that sometimes can really help people consider the way that they talk to each other, or even just point out like, I'm really good at spatial things, or I'm really good at communicating things like this. And also some other questions that I ask are like, what was that like? What do you wish they would have said? What do you wish, what felt like it would be more helpful to know? And then I kind of bring it out and say, okay, so let's go back to what you all came in here to talk about today, which was an argument about Bruce didn't take the trash out. I'm just going to use it very Bruce didn't take the trash out.
Our 30-year-old teenager.
Exactly.
He's never taken trash out in his life.
Oh my God. He doesn't even know where goes.
The trash is.
Exactly.
He lets a little old woman who takes care of his house do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we take something out and say, okay, so what happened? What did you hear when Alfred said that to you? And that's kind of how it goes. And so again, that's something where giving people a chance to look at something that doesn't have all their context and thoughts and feelings of it that's something that I do. And to be perfectly honest, as a therapist, it's super fun in general, just to like watch and experience people trying to do this, because it also gives me really great insight into what happens when there's a conflict, or what happens when communication breaks down, when it's not about something of like, oh, you said that you would get the groceries on this day, you got them on this other day. So they don't already have these preformed thoughts and feelings about the specific situation. This is something completely new. So it's also a really good way and like a safe, a neutral way to get a better insight into what their conflict is like and what it looks like and who retreats and who pursues, which I think I've talked about in other episodes. So I feel like that would definitely be something that I would want to try with them. And also would be, like you said, Brittany, like a way to kind of like soften them up and kind of be like, okay, like this, like we learned something.
Because I think people get turned off by therapy because they think they have to go in and just talk right away.
Yeah.
And that's just impossible, or like they're not open to it. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So we have to figure out ways to build rapport and to build understanding. And that would be a session where like maybe Alfred and Bruce would be like, oh, okay, that was really interesting to learn about the differences, because we're different people, that we communicate something differently, and that I'm really good at this and you're really good at this. And now that we know that, we have a better sense of what each other might need when we're talking about anything. It doesn't mean it's going to change something when they go home necessarily, but it certainly is going to give them a little bit more information and a little bit better understanding of how important communication is and how there are a lot of different parts to it. It isn't just the words that you say, it's the way that you say them. And it's all the other pieces and how willing you are to understand and to accept what the person is saying in front of you instead of trying to change their mind about it.
Yeah. And what I like about exercises like that too is it gives you an opportunity to remind them that they're on the same team, that you're coming here because you care about your relationship.
Yeah.
And it's not about, and people can get into this place where they're definitely at, which just feels combative or weirdly competitive, or like like me versus you. And so those kind of exercises, you have to sometimes keep reminding them, you're not competing right now about like who can do better at this. Their goal is to do the picture well. You have a unified goal, And can you sit in that reality? And can you really take that in, which can be really hard because people fall into that sort of more combative stance with each other without realizing it, or they don't realize how combative it's gotten.
Well, and they're going to start replaying old scripts to inform how to respond to present behavior. And the way that can become so nasty, so quick.
Yes.
Is something that I think is part of why people who get into couples therapy always go like, it didn't work for us. Like, yeah, did you wait till you hated each other?
Yeah. What was your vibe going into sessions? Was it like, I want an authority figure, aka the therapist, to shit on you and to tell you all the things you're fucking up in a relationship? And really, I as the therapist have to be like, no, I'm the couples, I'm the family's therapist, not your therapist or your therapist. My client is you as the collective. And that's what I'm prioritizing is the collective.
Well, and I tell couples, I was like, I'm here to work on your relationship, which doesn't work without the both of you. And so clearly there's some problems. Otherwise you wouldn't be in this room with me. So if you want help with that, I can help with that, but you're not just going to fight in my office. That's not what I do. That's not helpful for me. And it sure as fuck isn't helpful for you. Because it's something you're already doing on a regular basis at home. So we're not going to come in this room and just rehash every fucking fight you've ever had. This is about, clearly you both have things that you need to learn, and you need to learn how to, and most of the time, almost exclusively, it's learning how to communicate well with each other.
They're the kind of clients that would come to my office and be pushing back at me all the time. And I'd have to always be like, you came here, you chose to go to therapy. Why are you fighting me? And you will have clients who want to feel better and want to do better. And yet they're not quite ready to quote unquote surrender to therapy. And so they'll come at you with like, well, I don't know why I'm here. And I'm like, well, you didn't like fall into like a coma and then wake up in my office and then you have to do therapy. Like you chose to be here. So can we loosen up into that if we can?
Well,
but they definitely feel like they would be like that.
Well, and also though, it comes back to what it always comes back to, right? Which is we have to meet them where they are. And so, and that the using the picture, which is often just like weird shapes. This is something, again, giving people something that they can look at that's outside of their experiences with each other really helps them better understand and take it in without any judgment about I've definitely gotten people who are like, well, this is kind of stupid. And I'm like, yep, it is kind of stupid, but also we're going to do it anyway because it doesn't take that long and you came here for a reason. So anyway, so that's the only other piece I just wanted to add on to Brittany, to what you said.
All right, for you, Ben,
what do you got?
So I think for me, I would want to, I know I've said it before, so I'm going to say it now because as a trauma therapist, you cannot ignore the opportunity to work with Bruce Wayne, because the question always that I ask is, would Bruce Wayne need Batman if he had properly processed his parents' death?
Sure not.
That meme that I love of like that girl looking like her boyfriend's looking at another girl, and it's like Batman going to therapy. No, I'm just gonna fight crime.
Dress up like a bat and fight crime instead.
Yep. I think I've covered him so well in some of the other episodes that I think I'm not going to choose that direction this time. But I think that with Bruce in particular, if there's ever been a poster child for doing EMDR work and doing any sort of ego state parts work, Bruce is it, because he has we've covered throughout the episode and Travis covered so well, is that this Batman is the fully formed identity and Bruce Wayne has been pushed to the side. Bruce Wayne has not been developed. He has not been worked on. None of his needs are met beyond sleeping and tracking memories, but he is Batman with a slight mask of Bruce Wayne that needs to sleep. That's it. And I think if we treat Bruce Wayne, would Batman need to exist is the most important question. But I also have covered that in our Batman Begins and our Dark Knight episodes. So what I'm going to do is take a different approach here and look at the work that would need to be done with Jim Gordon. Seeing as that is part of my profession, is working with law enforcement officers, that watching what happened to him is something that does happen to law enforcement officers sometimes, where they have to watch the people who they've looked up to through their entire career and who they have taken example from, gone out and faced immense danger with, listen to their advice, listen to their things, gone to dinner with, and realize that the whole time that person was dirty. Yeah. And while that certainly doesn't represent all police officers in any stretch of the imagination, when it does happen, and it has, it's devastating to those like Jim Gordon, which I think for me is really important to be able to work with Jim to help him understand that the idea he holds in his mind about what police are supposed to be and that he holds himself to are not the things that all the police in Gotham hold to in this movie, where he is under the understanding he is fighting for the good guys, and not all of the police in this story are good guys. We see that there are police who stand on the side of justice in this film, and Jim brings them to arrest Carmine, but to understand at a level of how much it is going to be a conflicted thing for a person like Jim Gordon, who has dedicated his life to being the light in a dark situation, knowing that police behavior has been bad and that there have been instances where people have used their police powers to further criminal objectives, to hurt people, to further the lining of their own pockets in this Gotham City police department he has sworn his allegiance to, is going to be hard for him. And to help him find a way to reckon that and decide, is this something you're going to fight against for your career? Are you going to try to seize control and root out this corruption? Or is this something that you're going to decide you can't be a part of anymore? But to understand that the idea you had about what it meant to be GCPD was a fallacy that got corrupted, and that we have to live in the reality we have, not the one we wish we'd existed. And I think letting him have a space to process that and what that means, and how he will have to reform his understanding of what it means to trust the badge and trust the other officers that he goes out into the street with and who he lets on his team, is going to require a lot of work for him in order to be able to continue to do his job in the right way, which he remains a pillar of in any depiction that he's shown. Is that, excluding the version that was in the movie we don't speak of, who got corrupted by Poison Ivy and was a mess.
Batman and Robin.
Okay, we do.
Modern classic Batman and Robin.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk
Library
about that.
of Congress worthy Batman and Robin.
Brittany, we're gonna have words later.
We're going to have words in a minute. Once you're done, I'm just saying whatever you got to say. So go ahead and finish saying it.
Nah, but what I think it's just really important to recognize that the impact that good officers have when people in their orbit turn out to have gone dirty is a massive loss to them. And to realize that that is something that is worthy of mental health care is not often covered when we see that narrative covered in movies. And I think for me as a police therapist, that would be exactly the direction I would want to go, is to be working with Jim Gordon to help him process through the loss of faith in the organization he swore his entire life to realize that even that organization has been part of this massive corruption. I think that would be a lot to deal with, and I would want to help him through that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So moving on to final thoughts. Final thoughts, I can go first. I would say that this is my favorite Batman movie. I wanted to hate it because the oversaturation of Batman media, as I'm sure you guys have picked up on this podcast, I can get kind of agitated with. And so when I was like, another Batman movie, what? Do we need another Batman movie? And so I was annoyed when the trailer came out and I liked it. And then I was annoyed when another trailer came out and I also liked that. And then I begrudgingly saw it and I really liked it. Now, I think part of why I really like it is that it is so aggressively a noir and therefore inherently campy. I think once I locked into how noir-y it is, like it's a noir first and then a Batman movie second, that I really liked it. I thought it was hilarious. I think I laughed at more parts than the crowd I was in probably appreciated. Like every time the penguin talked, I pretty much laughed. But I really loved how teenagery Bruce Wayne was. I think this is the first Bruce Wayne where I felt like genuinely empathy for his plight. And because you could see kind of the wounded boy who was trying to figure it out. And so I really like all the aspects of the movie. I like the goth parts of it, the emo parts. I like how aggressively, like almost like dorkily emo it is. I like the Nirvana. I like the voiceover. I just like how stylized it is. And I hate to say it, I'm excited for the next movie and how that's going to continue to develop this character. Like I was saying, like,
wait, what was that word? What was that word you used?
Let me just, have it because I gave it to you and then just have it. Okay. But I think that I'm interested to see how it progresses, how the next one goes, how the Joker is, and if he does develop any sort of like Bruce Wayne persona, or if they keep just like leaning into this idea of him being this eccentric rich person, which I do kind of like, this sort of like hermity rich eccentric who just hides away in his little castle. So yeah, so I liked it annoyingly, and I'm excited for the next one.
I'll go next. So I think one of the things that I've said more than one time is that I hate how much I like this movie, which I think makes a lot of sense. This is definitely the first and only version of Batman that I have had any kind of even wanted to give a shit about how he was feeling or what his experience was like. I wish that they would use other villains. I don't want to see another movie where Joker's in it. That doesn't sound fun or interesting at all. That's too bad that's probably what they're going to do. But the movie was really good and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the noir pieces. I enjoyed the acting. I enjoyed the story. It really felt like a better introduction to somebody who is more torn up in a way that feels appropriate versus this rich prick that likes to dress up in a Batman suit
and kind of cosplay poverty when he feels like it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about this version. And I did really enjoy it. And I mean, we don't need any more because there's lots of other stories where the lead is not a white man. But it was good. Like it was enjoyable. I feel like I finally understood what Ben is always fighting me about when we talk about Batman, which is that he's suicidal. Even though in this film, he says, I will do whatever I have to.
It doesn't matter what happens to me.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what happens to me. But now, because of this version, I feel like I have a better understanding of that and don't necessarily feel like he is suicidal. But
Yay.
the way in this version.
He didn't even have to tell you he's not wearing hockey pads to understand that.
In this version. But yeah, so I like this movie. I might watch it again. It's pretty long. It's so long. I watched it last night. But it also I don't know, but it's good and I enjoyed it. And I'm glad that it doesn't feel as hard to see what Ben is always talking about Batman, that I always felt was just trash.
All right, Ben, take it away, brother.
Yeah.
So I love this movie. I adore this one. I think as I was sitting and watching it, I was thinking, oh my God, this is a better Batman movie than The Dark Knight. It's not a better movie than The Dark Knight. I'm going to be real specific there. But this was a better Batman movie because The Dark Knight is equal parts Bruce Wayne, Joker, and Two-Face, and Batman sprinkled in. Even though it's glorious, the main character of that is not Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, I adore The Dark Knight, but this was more authentic Batman. And this was true to Batman's origins of Batman the detective, and they made sure to cover that. They gave us access to his inner thoughts. They gave us access to his methods, to his espionage and detective work and his sleuthing. And I thought that this was the best pure look at Batman we've seen. And I also think part of my opinion comes as I recognize I get into these debates with people is that I'm starting to wonder if Batman and Doctor Who have a similar challenge to them, is that the first version of Batman you experience dictates how you see Batman. And for me,
that's my Batman kind of thing.
That's my Batman, because with Doctor Who, there was a lot of people who were like, oh man, I love this version of Doctor Who, but I hate that one. And this one is more like that one, so I like it more. And this one's more like that. And like the crankier Doctor Who's like Eccleston and Capaldi versus, do you like the more goofier ones like Tennant or Smith?
Mm-hmm. I do.
I mean, I absolutely adore Tennant as Doctor Who. I started with Eccleston, and I understand like a crankier Doctor Who and like the sassierness that he could have as opposed to like the silliness of Matt Smith that I didn't like as much. But I think with Batman, I started with Batman the Animated Series. That is how I started with Batman. I mean, I was a kid watching the reruns of the old 60s Batman, but that doesn't count.
Yeah, it's more episodic.
Right. And
like and cartoony.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
Which, ironically enough, the Batman the Animated Series cartoon is not. It's very grown up. And I watch it now and go like, wow, this is a little bit less of a kid's show than I remembered it being. But this carried a lot of that energy over that some of the Dark Knight and definitely the Keaton Batman did not. And I think for me, why I am so drawn to this is because this is the closest version of Batman the Animated Series type Batman we've had. But it feels like the beginning of that because Bruce Wayne was a fully formed identity by that point, but he's also older, probably in his 40s in that show. And I think watching this movie, we get to see this amazing concept come to life where every character has something in the way. And the use of the song Something in the Way by Nirvana, which is a definite deep cut, weird ass track. I think the thing that I want to look at is like just the way they made all of that intersect in such a brilliant way that you see each character that they introduce has to grow in some way, even though some get less screen time than others. That we see there's something in the way that's preventing each of them from becoming the character we know and love. That we're seeing this underdeveloped version where we see Bruce almost not developed at all. It's like, Bruce Wayne doesn't matter in this world. No one cares about him anymore. And then we see Batman come out as a pure force of aggression, just seeking out to punish criminals and less seeking to solve the big crimes until Riddler forces him into that. He's just out dealing with punks and thugs. He's not even interested in the mob. And then we see him realize that all of this is so much bigger and that his role as Batman and what he has to do for the city is more. And what's been in the way of that is his anger and his vengeance and him coming out and saying, I am vengeance, and everyone cheering that in the trailer and going like, that was badass, going like, you're missing the point of who Batman is. Watching Riddler have to realize that he can't be so fixated on just one person. He can't be fixated on that, on meeting his goals, because people always let him down. And once we see him make that narcissistic turn where he realizes my vision, my singular vision is the only one that matters. The events I put in place are the only ones I can trust and count on. He's going to become very dangerous, and whatever Joker's going to factor in and manipulate into him is going to be a sense of chaos that's going to be fascinating to watch. And I think watching Catwoman have to realize that the thing that's been keeping her held back is this idea that she has to stay around Falcone to take revenge on him before she can actualize. And she can't realize that she could have been doing anything else, something else, anything else to make money. She's obviously smart. She's obviously witty. And she is stuck living a server's life in a club in a way that keeps her from growing. And she has to let that go. And Penguin has his subservient cowardice that he lays back on. And this idea that we hold on to these mob ideals before he has to realize that I don't need Falcone to take over the criminal underworld. And we see his power realized at the end of the movie. So I love it. And I love watching each character resolve the thing that's in the way of them becoming who they're going to be. And I think this Batman movie is fantastic. I will agree, though, it's just a tad too long. Once they did the helicopter scene, the movie should have faded to black right there on Batman on top of the building. Pop, end of story.
Yeah.
But we felt every minute of that last 15. And I feel like with the end of the Planet of the Apes series, it was a lot of the same. So I hope that as Matt Reeves goes on, he learns from that rather than leans into it, that like there are some narrative things that feel important that maybe we can assume because it was long.
Yeah, it was long. I think the only thing that I forgot to say is that it was really nice to see, while we definitely saw the Catwoman character be sexualized in different ways, it wasn't the same as she's always been portrayed. Kind of, Ben, when you brought that up in the episode in general of her using her sexuality to get needs met or to manipulate other people or whatever, it was kind of nice to not see her outfit as sexualized in that way. I mean, she certainly had different clothes on when she had to go into the club and had to do different things. But in terms of the way that we usually are viewing Catwoman, this is the first film I've ever seen where that has not been the case. So that was nice. And also the people of color and the women of color in general in this, and their important role in this film, which is also something that I don't feel like I've ever seen before in a Batman film in general.
Right. Like, why can't Catwoman be of mixed race? Why can't she be any
not
race?
white? Just not be white. Like,
right. Why?
Absolutely.
Any of those characters, any character in a Batman story, they don't have to be a specific race. And I too appreciated that. Like, the world is diverse. A place like Gotham City,
which is a metropolis, probably one of the, like New York, basically, or Chicago, would be diverse.
Absolutely.
Incredibly diverse. And seeing the characters come across as diverse people from various backgrounds and various ethnicities and various looks be represented in this film in a way where they didn't make a thing of it. They just went, this is who they are. I think that was great.
Yeah.
We will ride our little motorcycles off into the sunset. And so if you want to find us, you can find us at Instagram and TikTok and Facebook at Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Twitter at popcorn_psych. We have a Patreon. If you would like to sponsor us, we always appreciate that. We also have a merch store at tpublic.com. And you can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. And if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, we greatly appreciate that. That's the best way that people can find us who aren't aware of us yet. And we read them all. So be nice or I'll cry. Good night.